Welcome to Rise and Thrive Conversations for Greatness. I'm your host, John Merkus, but I think you probably already knew that. Today, our guest's story is one of ambition, resilience, and lifelong learning. I can't wait to explore the insights she has to share. I had the privilege of knowing our guest since primary school. And through the years, we've stayed in touch a lot via social media. Social media gets a bad rap, but it's great to keeping people connected across different parts of the globe. And it's been awesome to watch her rise to the top of the tech world. She worked at Optus here in Australia when there was only 8 people in the company. Now, for people that don't know about the telecommunications background in Australia, we only used to have one government provider and then they opened up the market. Optus came in. Our guest today was in the first 8 people to be employed. And currently, Optus has 11 million customers. So you can see what a juggernaut that is. And she was there at the start. Then became a foundational sales executive for Sprint International in Australia. And then had the opportunity, or should I say, opportunity, to move to the USA as an international sales manager for Global One. We're going to hear all about this. She later transitioned into enterprise software, working with Microsoft partners before taking the bold leap, buying the very company that once hired her. Definitely got to dive into that. Today, she runs HD Dynamics Software Solutions Corporation, leading with her own values and vision. All the way from California, Jodi Herman, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to talk to Melbourne for a change. Thanks for having me.
And literally where it all started, because I'm living 700 meters from the school that we both went to, and we'll get to that. But I have got a feeling that the very first time I met you was at your birthday party when we were 11 or 12 years old. Now, can you tell the listeners how that came about?
Yes, was starting a new school in Black Rock. My parents were foster parents to 8 children. And my mum decided that the best way to be introduced to my class, little did I know that there was only 11 kids in our class, was to throw me a birthday party in January before school started. So she got a hold of the teachers and invited all the kids over, and that's how I was introduced to John. And lo and behold, he was only 2 blocks away, and that was wonderful. So we're really in spitting distance from each other in primary school, which is a wonderful experience for me. I'll never forget it. So I love Black Rock, and I still consider it my home, and that's kind of where I grew up.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love it too. Just earlier today, I went for a walk and I specifically walked past the old school, getting all the old vibes. Now, what a great idea from your mum to invite everyone. So it was a party atmosphere. Everyone loves lollies and all that kind of jazz. And then when you're a kid and getting to meet the new kid, I don't think a lot of new kids have that kind of induction into a new school, although I know they do it way better than they used to these days.
Yeah, it was I was very surprised. I did not expect that, but I think my mum just wanted me to settle in and be happy and meet some new friends, and
Mm.
because it's always different when you move from different places, like we had my parents have been foster parents up in Preston for the most part, and that's where I spent a lot of my junior years, going through primary school and so forth, and then the final year they got a home down just on Prospect Grove in Black Rock. So that changed my life living down there. It's been a wonderful experience.
Nice. And I remember your dad being able to hypnotize people and thinking, oh, I like to be hypnotized one day. Tell us about all of that.
My good old dad, he God bless him. He's in heaven right now, but my dad was actually a music teacher, and he thought that, he's always into the power of positive thinking, and he was like, I really want to try this on you. And he decided to read books and figure out how to hypnotize people. It's so weird that you bring this up because I remember him trying to do that on me. And I think the most I got out of it was remembering my 6th birthday. That's all he could tell me because I don't know if it worked. He said it did. So,
Hmm.
it's not something he did regularly. I think he was just had the curiosity of figuring it out. He was a very analytical guy, so
Mm.
he really liked to read and study things and put them into practice to see if they worked.
Nice. And so he had a curious mindset as well as a positive one. So I can see how that has rubbed off on you.
Yes, very much so. My parents were outstanding with the positivity in life. I think if you grow up, I've grown up since I was 5 years old till I was a teenager with kids in my house. You learn that, and you grow up fast, probably a lot faster than your peers in a lot of ways, because kids that are with you don't have parents, and they grow up in very sad situations. They come to live with us from all ages, from 3 years old to 18, and they've had their own experiences, and a lot of them traumatic. So you learn to kind of suck up your own issues and pay it forward constantly. They were like my brothers and sisters at the end of the day, and I always looked out for them. It just molds you into the person you are. You always look for the bigger side of life, the optimism, the things that'll change the world kind of thing, kind of attitude, because there's always people worse off than yourself. And my parents were always big believers. There's always people worse off than yourself. So appreciate and be grateful for everything that you have, and don't take it for granted, because tomorrow it'll be gone. But it's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. You got arms and legs. You got a brain between your ears, and use it. Keep moving forward.
Yeah, what a great attitude. So, Rise and Thrive listeners, Jodi's talking, just in case you missed it at the start, is that her parents took in people in foster care. And so, as you mentioned, Jodi, those kids without parents or that needed care or that needed to live in a family environment, they would be living with you. So that's where you got to have all those experiences. And that context for living, which I can see has kept you in good stead throughout your entire life.
Yes, it has. I've always been a quite an ambitious young soul. I've never followed the train tracks of everybody else who's been around my age. I've done things differently. I played baseball with guys, which was nobody else did. I was the only girl all my teenage life, because I just wanted to do something different and I could. So
Yeah.
playing baseball was my fun, my love, my passion, because my brother was into it too.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it was like, okay, learning from everything that presented an opportunity to me was just an opportunity for growth. And my mum always said, if you feel scared or you got fear about things, you got to walk through it. You got to think through it. You got to walk through it. And you got to suck it up. And I remember the first day of high school. Granted, I was 11 years old catching my bus for the first time to Kilbreda. I used to have nightmares catching a bus by myself for the first time at 11, and I was only 4'5" back then. Not that I've grown much, but
Is this before you, were these the nightmares before you actually did it?
yes, it was the nightmares before I did. And
Yep.
it was literally feel the fear and do it anyway. That was my mum's
Mm,
motto. So,
mm.
going through little moments like that, I've been through a lot of those challenges in my life. And it's how do I deal with it? And, you'll learn how to grow. You learn how to absorb the people around you to give you the best advice to coach you through things. Never take things for granted that you can do things by yourself. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There are a lot of messages in life that you have to feel the fear and do it anyway. And some people
Mm.
find it very hard to step past that, or they try to skirt around it, or they go in a different direction. But to me, there's something magical about walking through fear. To me, it's always ended up being a positive response in my life.
Great mindset. And that's where the growth and learning happens often when you're feeling the fear and you break through that fear and that sense of achievement as well. I'm just doing a course at the moment and they talk about fear and they have reframed it and altered the word to call it expansion. So if you're feeling expansion, no need to
Interesting.
be concerned. It just means you're learning and growing and you'll be better. You'll be better for it.
Yeah. It teaches us tolerance, and it teaches us endurance about what we can actually absorb. Because to me, it's like, I'm a Christian. It's like God only gives you as much as you can handle. He doesn't give you more than that. So if He presents things that you think are insurmountable, they're only there because you're capable. You're just not aware of it, or you're too afraid of it.
Yeah, I love that philosophy, and it's so comforting and helps you drive forward. I absolutely, absolutely love it. Well, you have taken opportunities that maybe not a lot of others have, or should I say, you've created opportunities because of who you are and the places you've put yourself in. So when you were working in Australia and you were had the opportunity to work and move to the USA, tell us about how that came about.
That was a very interesting transition in my life. My goal when I was 18 and left school and started at the NAB, as a lot of kids do, right? They started a normal paying salary job. My goal was always to earn more than my age. And back then, you were, if you worked at the bank and you were 18, you were only making $13,000 a year in the late 80s, right?
Yeah, and you can remember that. I guess if you had that goal of earning more than your age, of course you'd remember. But
Oh
yeah,
my gosh, yeah. And when in my 20s, it was the same thing when I got started at Optus. It's like, oh, there was 3,000 people interviewing for the job through Price Waterhouse, and you had to go through these five-step interview processes. And I remember, this is a fun story actually. I remember calling my brother and I said, I've been called back for a second interview. What do I do? And he goes, well, just put some thought into it, because now they're going to ask you what makes you different. I'm like, you realize there's over 2,000 people that are applying through this job that was in the paper because it's for the call center, right? So that's where the ground floor was. And so I kept thinking about it. And he goes, stop bugging me because I kept calling him every 5 minutes, going, what do I do? How do I think about this? And I was barely 21 when this was happening and hadn't had a lot of interviewing experience. And my brother goes, I don't know, tell him how to make cookies or something. Oh, I got to go. And he blew me off. So I actually slept on it that night. And a couple of days later, I went in to Price Waterhouse and they asked the question, what makes you different from everybody else? So I told them the story of how to make a banana cake and I compared it to myself.
right.
Word for word, step by step, all the different ingredients, making
Yep.
sure they're all perfect, measured, timed, baked, same result every time you take a slice.
Yep.
And I compared it to who I was consistency, same flavor, extraordinary, blah, 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 completed,
Excellent.
and that popped out. So that's how I got hired at Optus, which was really like, oh my God, it worked. I was floored, but it was unique, and I wasn't thinking about it like that. I was just taking a stab in the dark going, I don't know what else to say except that. So
Yep.
it worked.
Yep. I love it how a conversation with your brother, regardless of how it was meant to be, kind of sparks something in you, and then you use that to tell a story and stand out at a job interview to make sure that you got the job because everyone would have been saying the same thing. Oh, I'm reliable. I'm this. I'm this. I'm this.
Yes, there was a static answer. Yeah.
Yeah, how memorable! This girl told us how to make banana cake or banana bread, whatever it was, and equated that to how she is. And yeah, definitely memorable. No wonder you got the job.
Yeah, and so the days when Optus was starting, this is it was growing so rapidly. I mean,
Mm,
within probably 6 months, they had 300 people on the call center floor. But the first eight of us had 6 weeks of solid telecom training, which was
yeah.
amazing, right? So you learn all this foundational stuff. It's very technical. They spent a lot of money on training, and I just absorbed everything, all the information I possibly could. And then it was like, okay, so I'm going to be a bean counter for one of 400 people on a call center floor after doing 4.5 years of call center work, day in, day out, different shift work, didn't care, was barely making my age at the time. And I was like, and, they have all these team meetings. So they had a big powwow. The powers of being said, we've got to change the marketing focus of how we present Optus, because it was like, oh, we'll
Mm,
give you $10 off if you dial one. That was the saying back then, right? Dial one and we'll give you $10 off your bill. And a room full of people, and they said, okay, come on, people, what are your thoughts? How do we change the philosophy of the company? I put my hand up. I said, well, why don't you just make it a percentage instead of a dollar sign? Because percentages are all, it's perception, right? What's 10% off a bill? people can't quantify that. So you save more money as a company by giving people 10% off. And they're like,
Mhm.
oh my God, that's amazing. That's fantastic. So I just ended up excelling in those sort of areas. I was doing very well with my call rates and all that sort of stuff. And then one of my clients who just kept calling and calling and asking for advice and blah blah blah. They wanted to start up a new little group within telemarketing that could handle, say, the 50 to $100,000 worth of business, which was really how do we grow this segment? Because you had the account managers who were dealing with corporations, but you had nobody who was dealing in this mid-market range, small medium business market range.
Right.
And so they put two of us who'd been there for a long time, two girls, on this job. We had our own little desk, same sort of setup and everything. It was like, okay, if you guys can do this, then it'll work. And they gave us a subset of, auto dialing numbers to call and blah, blah, blah. So this one guy who I'd been just chatting to, I wasn't a big script follower back then, even though I was told to be, I wasn't very good at it. I just had conversations with people most of the time.
Yeah.
And this guy calls up and he goes, Jodi, are you allowed to go visit clients? I said, well, I've got this new role. Let me ask. So I asked my team leader, I said, is it all right if I go and visit this guy? I said, he's, a couple of suburbs over. It's not that long. I'll take about an hour. So I ended up selling 50 mobile phones back then. That's
Yeah.
when the bricks were out, the mobile
Yeah.
bricks.
That would have been massive,
And
big sale.
yeah, so they were just wrapped, absolutely wrapped. And then a few months later, Sprint International came to town. My mum goes, well, why don't you try for this job? And I said, oh, I don't know. I've never really done outside sales, though. I've only had a little bit of experience, but I'll give it a shot. And so I met with all the powers of being. I was very nervous because this is the first time I was going to actually make more than my age and have a real job as a salesperson on the street. And I used to bug all the account managers at Optus and go up and down the elevators and say, how did you do today? And I'd buy them coffee in the morning. I'd always rack their brains about how they did their sales and how good they were on the street and so forth. And turns out I went for this interview at Sprint. I told them the same story.
The
I told
banana
them
one.
how to make a banana cake
Nice.
with walnuts.
Yep.
With walnuts
This
this time.
time add some
Added
nuts
the
this
walnut.
time.
And
Yep. Yep.
I got the job. I was the first salesperson in Melbourne for Sprint
That's a
International.
sure
I'm
thing.
like, oh my God, it's worked twice.
Rise and thrivers out there, if you want to stand out, tell a story about baking, equate that to yourself because no one else apart from Jodi Herman's doing that and it's got a good strike rate.
It's working. The irony is, I've never baked a banana cake in my life.
That's hilarious. But what I'm hearing though is that early mindset of feeling the fear and doing it anyway, that positive mindset, positive attitude, gratitude as well, attitude of gratitude, things like that, has kind of gave you a bit of a personality of not a carefree personality, but a personality where you're happy to talk to people.
Yeah.
And because you also have the curious mindset, all that curiosity you displayed in your job, that's what I meant earlier about being interested in how you came to create that opportunity for yourself. And now you're explaining how you did that because it really comes through that it was who you were being and what you did, which is what this show is all about, really gave you extraordinary opportunity.
I think a lot of it had to do, maybe it's just being a little sister, but when you want to be something in a company and you've got access to it for people who are doing those roles,
Hmm.
it was really seeing those people on your break times or buying them coffee or sit and have a chat at lunchtime when they're having a sandwich and asking for 5 minutes. Even if they seem big and, extraordinary, because that's how they were to me. These guys in their 30s and 40s and they got their company cars and their phones and their suits and they're
Hmm.
it. And I'm like, they're going to look at me as some kid who's just working the phones, and they're not going to think of me. But it was like the nicer I can be and accommodating, maybe they'll give me 5 or 10 minutes of their time to share with me what they do. And so
Yeah.
you just start building these relationships without. Sometimes I was a pest, but other times it was just curiosity. Like, Tell me
Mm,
how you did this. Like, what did you sell recently? Can you tell me how you did that? And not being afraid to approach people. If you approach them kindly and with sensitivity to their space and what they're doing, but with such a curious mind that they feel like they're giving you something, like they're offering you their knowledge and their power, put them in a
mm,
position of stature so they
mm.
feel comfortable to deliver the goods to you and to share with you.
Nice. So you made it easy for them, which is another key. So it wasn't hard for them to have a conversation with you and coming with that curious mindset. And so they were giving you something. And a lot of people will, we like to talk about ourselves as human beings. So if someone asks a question about us,
Mhm.
that's often received pretty well. So I love it
Yeah.
how you did that. And so we're still in Australia. We haven't got to the US yet.
No, that's a whole other bag of worms.
So how did you get there?
Working at Global One, I was doing pretty well. I'd worked up a network of people selling to a lot of stockbroking firms, and this is when we were just dialing out. I mean, we were barely using email back then, or just starting to in corporations. So I was getting all the trade floors and stuff like that, and working my network of stockbroking firms. So anyway, um, the Sprint corporate guys were going to come over to Australia for a conference, and they were inviting all the salespeople for the yearly get together from all of Asia Pac up in Sydney. And my goal was like, I've got to meet these people because when I was working accounts that were headquartered in the US and I got a hold of the account managers in the US, my counterparts, literally, I was talking to them as they were my equals, and they were sharing with me, they were buying these, 4-bedroom houses and driving nice BMWs, and I'm like, oh my God, I want a piece of that. How are you doing that? You're doing less business than me, and I'm hustling. I'm hustling like crazy and paying my skimpy rent and just, figuring life out to pay for myself at the end of the day. And it just kept stirring my pot inside. So anyway, when these corporate bigwigs came to Sydney and we flew up there for this conference and met a bunch of people, I made sure out of 100 people that I sat across the from at a restaurant at Doyle's, actually, in Sydney. I made sure I sat across from him at dinner. And I started talking to him. I said, "Listen," I said, "I know in the US, the guys that are doing my job are making like 500 times more than I am. And how do I get there? Because I want to get there." I was just
Excellent.
blunt because I
That's
said,
so
"This is what
good.
I want."
That's so good. You put yourself in that position, though. You said, "This is what I want." The best way to do that is to sit opposite this guy during dinner, and then we'll have a chat, and I'll be clear about what I'm
Yeah.
interested in.
Yeah, I just said, "Hey, I know you don't have a lot of time to talk to me." I said, "This is what I do. I'm from Melbourne. In case you haven't heard of me," I said, "I work with a lot of the US guys." I said, "How do I get what they have and how do I get to the US?" And he goes, "Well, give me your email and your phone number, blah, blah." So I gave him my card, and he called me and we talked. And then he faxed me, or sent me in the mail, I should say, back then, this organizational chart of Sprint all over the country, like all the different layers. I mean, I was overwhelmed. There's probably 25 pages of org charts.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? And he goes, you figure it out and we'll talk. He goes, I'll give you a couple of months. Like, okay, am I supposed to interview with people? And he goes, yeah, just call them up. All the phone numbers are there of all the vice presidents and the managers of all these different, business units and stuff like that all over the country. You figure it out. So I'm like, okay. So I'm like, I've got some points. I got this, I don't know, something happened with United Airlines and I got this certificate upgrade for United Airlines. And they didn't specify whether it was domestic or international. So I called them, I said, I would like a ticket, round trip ticket to the US. Can I use this upgrade certificate? Because it doesn't say domestic or international. And they said, yeah, you can use this. No problems. And for whatever reason, I had enough points and they stuck me on this thing, but I planned out a whole trip around the US on my dime from LA to Dallas to Miami to Atlanta to Cincinnati to Chicago back to San Francisco and then from San Francisco back home. And it was about 14 days I'd planned it.
Yep.
And I had set up interviews for all different layers of management. I really wasn't sure, because there were national accounts, there were small business accounts. So it was just whoever would interview me in my time frame that I was traveling would meet me at airports, or they'd meet me at a coffee shop if they couldn't make it, or somewhere. Sometimes I'd have to spend a couple of days there just having an interview with people. And I was exhausted because by the time I got to San Francisco, I was doing I was looking after Hewlett Packard Asia Pacific, and they had a corporate meeting in Palo Alto, which was the only way I could write it off on my taxes. So I had this meeting. I was representing Asia Pac. It was all awesome. And then this guy walked up to me. He goes, "Oh, you must be Jodi. I've heard a lot about you." I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, that's nice." He goes, "Have you got a resume on you?" And I said, "Where are you from? Are you from Sprint?" And he goes, "No, I'm from Global One. Dave Ryan sent me, who was the guy I had met in Sydney. He met me in San Francisco." He goes, "Can I have your resume?" He goes, "I'll be in touch with you in a couple of weeks." So in a couple of weeks, I got in the mail, I got an offer for a job working for Global One. And then when they flew me over and relocated me to Southern California, which I had no idea where I was going to land, literally said, "Do you want to work on a beach in Southern California?" I'm like, "Sure, okay, but we'll fly you to Virginia where headquarters was." Flew me there. I sat across from Dave Ryan. I go, "Listen, I've just spent all this money and all these interviews with the Sprint people. Why did you make me go through it?" He goes, "I just wanted you to meet all the people you're going to look after."
Right.
And so I ended up being responsible for two vice presidents of Sprint in the southern area of California, Nevada, and Arizona.
What a great story about how you ended up in the USA, but only through your own initiative,
Yeah.
taking action, not necessarily knowing what the outcome was, but just knowing that I'll just do the next thing in front of me and the next thing and the next thing at your own expenses as well, because you had a goal, you wanted to work over there somehow, some way. And it ended up happening. I love stories like that, but only because you put it out there and you took the action and you had the mindset that went along with it.
I was 25 years old when I did that. I
Yeah.
was working, every person that I worked with at Global One was in their 40s, and I
Yep.
was one of only two females. So that kind of says a lot. It was like, oh my gosh. And I
And,
wanted to reflect on one thing. When I first got to talking about obstacles and feeling the fear anyway, number one, I got there, which was great, but I still had to prove myself, right?
mm,
Bunch of people I've never met before in my life, different country, different opportunity, different corporations, understanding the climate of business. Within 2 weeks, I had to go to New York to do a presentation with the Sprint team to Seagram's and MCA Universal. So they were on Park Avenue in New York, and it was like a $4 million deal that Sprint were doing. And so they literally they sent like 13 Sprint people from one of my offices that I was looking after to New York, and we spent 3 days in this boardroom just going through the nuts and bolts of this huge presentation that we were supposed to do. So I'm nervous. I'm not sleeping for 3 days. I am literally pounding the carpet in my room.
it's pretty. I can imagine because how long is this? You said that wasn't long after you
Two
had
weeks.
2 weeks,
2 weeks
right?
after I landed, yeah.
So you've done all that work to get the job, and then you're in the job for 2 weeks, and then you're off to New York doing a massive multi-million-dollar deal in a Park Avenue boardroom. Careful what you wish for, I guess.
All I'm thinking to myself, this is my icebreaker. If I don't do this, I'm done.
Yeah,
And that's all I kept thinking about because, like
yeah,
you, I went through Toastmasters. I'm like, this is my icebreaker. If I don't do this, I'm not earning my stripes. I'm not going to
yep,
last that long. I'm going to be watched like a hawk.
yep.
And we get to this meeting. Mind you, I'm living on adrenaline, no sleep. The Sprint guys get up there. Meanwhile, there's 13 of them. The amount of money that they spent to get there and stay there in a hotel for 3 days was just ridiculous because I'm
Mm.
like, why do we need 13 people for a 2.5 hour meeting? They literally got up there for, I would say, no more than 40 minutes and they froze. And I said, is there anybody else that wants to come up? And they're like, no, no, we've covered everything. I said, fine, I'm taking it. So I got up there and spoke for about an hour and 45 minutes to everybody in the room. I didn't have to reference anything because all the knowledge was stored up in my head. I mean, they were asking me, meantime round trips on a call to Mexico and just all these technical things as well. And I just kept shooting from the hip. It was just
Yeah.
like guns were blazing. It was the best moment of my life. I walked out of there. I mean, everybody that was in there who was the client came up and shook my hand. So that was just brilliant how you just
Yeah.
took it and ran with it.
You Aussies.
Sprint Sprint ended up signing the deal, and I
Yeah.
slept for 3 days after that. I flew
Yeah.
home and I was just dead. I was like, "I can't breathe." I was just
Yeah.
so exhausted,
Yeah.
mentally just tanked out, but that was probably the single most amazing thing I've ever done for my life that absolutely scared the pips out of me.
Yeah. And you did it anyway, and it made a difference. You put your all into it, and you went
Yeah.
the extra mile even before the presentation, by the sound of it, to know all of that
Yes.
stuff.
Yeah.
With that confidence and knowing and just taking the bulls by the horn. That's how it goes. Yeah. Taking, yeah, whatever it is, took initiative to have and lead that meeting to the point where they're loving you.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
was it was more for my self-worth at my job to prove
Yeah.
myself rather than what it was for Sprint at that time because I'm like, my bosses
Yeah.
are going to watch me to see if I can execute.
Yeah.
And I was only supposed to speak for like 20 minutes and
Yeah.
I had to
Yeah.
carry the whole meeting. It was
Yeah.
quite embarrassing for Sprint to say the least, but and I was nervous for them because I'm like, oh God, I hope this works for them because
Mm, mm.
they froze. I'm like, 13
Yeah.
people froze. You guys live here. It's like, wow. But you put people on a pedestal when you're from a different country too, because
Yeah.
you think they're America, they're corporate giants, they know everything, they're smart, they've got all these degrees, they're
Mm,
this and
mm.
that, and you feel a little intimidated. Like,
Yeah.
what do I have to do to match up to get to that level? And that's how I felt as a 25-year-old. I was like, ooh,
Yeah.
part of me was
Yeah.
extremely nervous on that count.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. And knowing that you've got to perform, especially when you're in that kind of role, it's performance based and results based. So you knew that you needed to produce a result to be able to keep going to pursue your dreams of living and working in the USA. And so that's one of the differences you just mentioned, or one of the things that you noticed about how you think maybe coming from Australia and you go to the USA and you think, you put, to use your words, you can put people on pedestals or not. And then to use what I've heard Americans say, just putting our pants on one leg at a time like everyone else. What are some of the other differences you've noticed between Australia and the USA, even back in those early days or even these days?
I think Australians on a whole, and this is very general, but just from my own experience, I think we're a very more of a hands-on people at heart. We tend to want to know what people do in their jobs, not just um, technically, but emotionally as well. Like, we appreciate the grind that it takes for people to succeed and watch people elevate, and we're always curious about how that happens. I think from my own personal experience, driving and thriving and striving to be where I wanted to be was part of the tenacity, was also proving to yourself that you could do it. Being independent is something that Australians take very seriously in my mind. I mean, everybody was traveling. A lot of my girlfriends out of high school were traveling the world, exploring things. We weren't afraid to explore and challenge ourselves to new experiences. And I think we have a higher regard for ourselves doing that and being more self assured and aware of life around us, not just our own little bubble in our world. It's knowing everything around us besides who we are as people. And I think that stands out a lot in the differences in natural personality. We have greater curiosity for other people than what they do for themselves sometimes. I find that
Right.
here it's quite difficult to get to know people sincerely here, simply because they are very insulated in their environment.
Yeah,
Whereas
right.
we have to grow by learning what's external to us. It's always been presented to us that way. Learn what's around you, learn about other people.
because we're down here in the southern hemisphere on a massive island, and to do anything outside of the country or within there's only 30 million people in Australia, so that's how many in the States? 350 million or something like that.
400 something billion.
For
Yeah, there's a lot.
yeah,
There's a lot. I don't think it's
yeah,
billion, but million. 400 and
yeah,
something million people. It's ridiculous. Yeah, and growing.
yes. So more than 10, it could even be 15 times bigger in terms of population here. So
Yeah.
you can
Where
see.
where I live in Orange County, there is 22,000 people. So, sorry, 22 million people live in Orange County, which is almost the population of Australia. So that tells you how many
Holy
people
moly.
there are in the country.
Yeah.
And it means when you go to the park or the beach, there's always somebody. It's not like
Yeah.
you get peace and quiet if you go eat a sandwich on Black Rock Beach at lunchtime. None of that. None of that. There's always people everywhere.
Yeah, we've got it. We've certainly got it good here. Now, this show goes out to over 30 countries, including the USA. So I'm wondering if people can relate over there in the States.
I have a
Probably.
lot of
I don't know.
expats friends here. When I first moved here, I was part of an organisation called the Australian American New Zealand Association, which encompassed the Consulate General from Australia and New Zealand at the time. And that's how I kind of hooked up with a lot of Aussies, just to get rid of that, that aching homesickness and being camaraderie for fellow Australians. And I've still got really good friends that over 20 years that I've known them who have lived here, and they have welcomed me with open arms as far as that's concerned. But they're from all walks of life, and I have a famous opera singer, Catherine Ireland. She was a very famous opera singer in Sydney at the Opera House. I have Simon Arkell, who was a famous Olympian for Australia for pole vaulting back in the 80s in Atlanta. So, and they're very close friends of mine. So, these are just people because we had something in common. We were by ourselves, we were working, living from different parts of Australia, but that's how I've kind of kept my roots where they are. But when we get together, we're very Aussie, extremely Aussie, and it's like, phew, finally somebody who understands me.
Yeah, I have noticed the Australian accent can be a challenge for a lot of people outside of Australia. Remember, I did a 5 minute stand up routine in Malaysia, and they couldn't understand a word I said, so I did not get one laugh. Anyway, that's that's a whole other story. But you're big on building relationships, right? I can hear that, and
Yeah.
so that's and personal and professional. And that's not always easy for people. So I'm wondering what advice you might give to people that are thinking, look, I know it's great to build those kind of relationships and to network and whatnot, but I just struggle in that area. What would you say to them? Jodi's about to give you some awesome advice, but that's in part two. Wow, what an incredible journey so far. Jodi's story's packed with resilience, bold moves, and the mindset needed to turn ambition into reality. From standing out in interviews with her now famous banana cake story to creating opportunities that led her across the globe, she's shown us what's possible when you push past the fear and take action. In next week's episode, Jodi shares the biggest lesson she's learned about building meaningful relationships, the power of mentors in shaping success, and some insider insights on navigating life and business. Plus, she reveals the one skill that's been a game changer in her career and how anyone, no matter who they are, can apply it to unlock new opportunities. You won't want to miss part two. Stay tuned. And as always, keep rising, keep thriving, and stay awesome.
Your best life starts with your best mindset. The Fluid Reality app gives you the tools to focus, stay motivated, and go after what you want. With guided meditations and mindset practices, we will help you unlock your full potential. Grab it from johnmerkus.com today and take the first step toward your best self.